Have you ever wondered why, after everything you've built, the family, the home, the career, the life you've worked so hard for, there are still nights when you lie awake staring at the ceiling? Why do I feel so restless inside? Why does my mind keep racing when the house is finally quiet? Why does my heart ache in a way no one sees? They tell us that after 40, after 50, we should have it all figured out, that life should feel settled, secure, complete. But here's the quiet truth no one talks about. Sometimes, just when life looks most put together on the outside, we feel the emptiest within. But what if this emptiness isn't a sign that something's wrong with you? What if it's an invitation, a doorway to the most meaningful chapter of your life? In this video, we'll walk together into that doorway. We'll explore a path shaped by Buddhist wisdom, by the hard-won lessons of overthinking and surrender, by the quiet miracle of discovering peace, not as something to chase, but as something that's been waiting inside you all along. By the end of this journey, you won't just have tools to quiet your mind. You'll have a new relationship with yourself, one filled with compassion, presence, and a freedom you may have thought was gone forever. So, take a deep breath. You're right where you need to be. And I'm so grateful you're here. Have you ever laid in bed at night, the house completely quiet, and felt that strange ache inside your chest? Not pain, exactly. Not sadness, either. Just empty. You've done everything you were supposed to. You raised your kids. You worked hard. You kept the house running. You checked every box on life's checklist. And yet, here you are, staring at the ceiling, wondering why your heart feels so heavy when life looks fine on the outside. If you're over 40, you know this feeling better than most. Maybe the kids have moved out. Maybe retirement is peeking around the corner. Maybe the person you thought would be by your side forever is no longer here. The world quiets down. But inside, your mind gets louder. Emily Harris knows this feeling well. She's 52, a nurse in a small town. Someone people look up to. Strong, reliable, a woman who gets things done. But at night, when the shift is over, when the uniform comes off, and when she sits alone at the kitchen table with a cup of tea going cold in her hands, that's when the ache shows up. She glances at the window. The curtains are drawn. The world outside is dark, silent. For years, Emily has kept that window shut tight. Not just the window, but something in her heart, too. She doesn't want to think about the loneliness. She doesn't want to admit that she feels invisible sometimes, like she's walking through life without anyone truly seeing her. It's not just Emily. Maybe you've felt it too. Maybe you've asked yourself, why do I feel so restless even when nothing's wrong? Why do I keep replaying old conversations in my head? Why does joy feel so far away, like it slipped out the back door when I wasn't looking? That's what overthinking does. It takes ordinary moments and turns them into storms. It takes quiet evenings and fills them with noise. And after 40, it only gets louder. Because here's the truth no one tells you. As life slows down on the outside, the mind speeds up on the inside. You have more time to think, more time to look back, more space for old doubts and new fears to creep in. And unless you know how to meet that storm with something steadier, you can spend years, even decades, stuck in that restless place. One evening, Emily sat at the table, listening to the clock tick on the wall. Tick, tick, tick. She sipped her tea, tasted nothing, felt the old familiar restlessness rising. Her phone buzzed. It was her daughter, Sarah, "Love you, Mom," the text said. Just 3 words, but they landed like a stone in Emily's heart, because under the love was a reminder. Sarah was busy with her own life now. And Emily was alone in a house that had once been filled with noise and laughter. She stood up, walked to the window, and for the first time in years she pulled the curtain aside. The moon was out, big, round, glowing like a silent witness. And just for a moment, Emily let herself feel the ache. No pushing it away, no pretending she was fine. She just stood there, breathing, and whispered, "Why can't I just be at peace?" That question, simple, raw, is where everything began to shift. Because the Buddhist path doesn't start by fixing you. It doesn't begin with forcing the mind to be quiet. It begins with turning toward what you've been running from, with sitting beside your restless thoughts like you would sit beside an old friend. Buddhist wisdom says, you are not your thoughts, you are the sky. Everything else is just the weather. Imagine that. You right now reading this, you are the vast open sky. Your worries, your regrets, your what-ifs, they pass through. Some stay longer, some drift away quickly, but you remain. Emily didn't know this teaching yet, but standing at that window under the moon, something softened. She stopped trying to push the feelings away. She stopped trying to distract herself with cleaning or scrolling through her phone. She simply breathed, and for a few minutes that was enough. This is the doorway most of us miss. We think peace will come when we solve all our problems, when we stop overthinking, when life finally behaves the way we want it to. But the real doorway, the one Emily was standing in that night, is learning to stay present even when the mind is noisy, even when the heart is heavy. And here's the beautiful twist. The moment you stop fighting the storm begins to lose its power over you. As Emily turned away from the window, she felt something shift inside. No, her problems weren't solved. No, the loneliness didn't magically vanish. But she had taken the first brave step toward change. She had faced herself with honesty. In the coming weeks, that moment at the window would come back to her again and again. When she felt anxious at work, when she missed Sarah's voice, when she woke up at 3 a.m., mind racing, she would remember the moon, the stillness, the breath. She would remember that peace isn't the absence of struggle. It's the presence of compassion for yourself in the middle of it. And maybe, as you sit reading this, you can feel it too. You don't have to wait for your life to be perfect. You don't have to silence every thought before you can feel calm. You just have to pause, to breathe, to whisper to yourself, I am here, I am enough. So tonight, if you find yourself wide awake staring at the ceiling, I invite you to do what Emily did. Go to the window, let the moonlight touch your face. Feel the cool night air on your skin. Place a hand over your heart, and without needing to fix anything, without needing to figure it all out, just tell yourself, I am still here. I am still standing. And that's enough for now, because sometimes the most powerful beginning is not in doing something big. It's in daring to stop running. And Emily, though she didn't know it yet, had just stepped into a new chapter of her life. One where overthinking no longer ran the show. One where peace was waiting quietly, right on the other side of a single breath. The next morning, Emily woke early. just as she always did. The sunlight was sneaking through the curtains, casting thin golden stripes across the floor. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that once made her restless. But something felt different today. Emily sat at the edge of her bed, her feet touching the cool wooden floor. She closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of her own body, the rhythm of her own breath. Yesterday, standing by the window, something had cracked open inside her. Just a little, just enough to make her wonder. What if I stopped running from my thoughts? She walked into the kitchen, made herself a cup of coffee, and instead of turning on the TV or scrolling through her phone, she sat. Just sat. The coffee warmed her hands. The smell filled the room. And there, in that small moment, something remarkable happened. Her mind, of course, began its usual dance. Did I pay that bill? Did I say the right thing to Sarah yesterday? What if I'm just wasting time sitting here? But instead of pushing those thoughts away, instead of drowning in them, Emily remembered the moonlight from the night before. She imagined her thoughts like clouds passing across the sky of her mind, and she whispered to herself, "It's okay. I see you. Keep moving." Here's the thing most people don't realize. Overthinking isn't the enemy. It's the body's confused way of trying to protect you. The mind spins its wheels, searching for answers, searching for control, because it believes if it can just figure everything out, you'll finally feel safe. But the safety we crave doesn't come from controlling life. It comes from softening into it. Buddhist wisdom teaches that life is like a river, always moving, always changing. You can fight the current and exhaust yourself, or you can learn to float, to trust, to let the water carry you. That morning, Emily took her first lesson in floating. She sat. She breathed. She allowed her mind to chatter without letting it drag her under. And when her heart began to race, when the old familiar tension tightened across her shoulders, she placed a hand on her chest and whispered, "I am here." And something softened. Later that day, Emily went about her routines, laundry, errands, tidying up. She caught herself a few times lost in thought, worrying over small things. But each time she noticed, she smiled softly. "Oh, there you are again," she'd think. And then she would come back to the present moment. The feeling of her hands folding the clothes, the sound of her footsteps on the floor, the sunlight warming her face as she stepped outside. Emily was beginning to practice something the Buddha called the middle way, the path between extremes. Not forcing herself to stop thinking, not drowning in thought either, but walking the gentle path of awareness between them. One afternoon, her neighbor Linda knocked on the door. Linda was flustered, papers in hand, worried over some bills and appointments. In the past, Emily would have joined her in the storm, rushing to fix, to advise, to manage. But this time, Emily paused. She invited Linda in, made her a cup of tea, and they sat together at the table. For a moment they were both still. "I just feel so overwhelmed," Linda confessed, her voice cracking. Emily placed her hand gently over Linda's and said, "I know. I really do. But let's take one thing at a time." They sorted through the papers together, slow and steady, and something remarkable unfolded. Emily realized that her own calm was now touching the people around her. The peace she was learning to cultivate wasn't just for herself. It was becoming a gift she could offer to others. That evening, as Emily sat on her porch watching the sun dip behind the trees, she thought about all the years she had spent tangled in her mind. All the nights lying awake, all the hours spent chasing worries, and she realized none of it had ever brought her closer to peace. The peace came not from solving every problem, but from being willing to sit with life as it is, to breathe with it, to soften around it. And here's the twist. The moment that surprised even Emily, the more she stopped trying to control her thoughts, the less power they had over her. Like a child throwing a tantrum that quiets when you no longer react. The mind settles when it no longer feels the need to scream for attention. Emily began keeping a small notebook by her bed. Each night before sleep, she would write down 3 things she noticed that day. Not big achievements, not milestones, just small, quiet things. The warmth of the coffee cup in the morning, the way the light hit the kitchen wall at noon, the sound of Linda's laughter over tea. And each night as she closed the notebook, Emily felt herself exhale into a deeper kind of rest. Not the rest of exhaustion, but the rest of trust. Because here's what she was learning, and maybe it's what you need to hear too. Peace isn't a prize you win when you finally fix yourself. It's a practice you begin right here, right now, in the middle of your imperfect, beautiful, messy life. So tonight, when the house quiets down, when the old familiar ache stirs in your chest, I invite you to do what Emily did. Sit with it. Breathe with it. Whisper to yourself, I am here. I am enough. And slowly, gently watch as the storm inside you begins to soften. Emily didn't know it yet, but her quiet experiment with sitting and breathing was about to meet its first real test. Because life, as it always does, was waiting with a curveball. It was a Thursday afternoon when she got the call. Her daughter, Rachel, who lived 2 states away, was going through a divorce. The words poured out over the phone. The heartbreak, the exhaustion, the sharp edge of disappointment. Rachel's voice cracked, trembling through the line, and Emily felt that old wave rise up inside her. The urge to fix, to fly out the door, book a flight, arrive with bags of solutions, and a heart too full to carry. But as she stood there in her kitchen, phone pressed to her ear, something in Emily paused. She remembered the breath. She remembered the river. And instead of launching into advice or action, she said softly, Oh, honey, that sounds so heavy. I'm here with you. And then she was quiet. That silence, it wasn't empty, it was spacious. It wrapped around Rachel like arms that reached through the miles, and on the other end Rachel exhaled the first real breath she had taken in days. Thanks, Mom, she whispered. I didn't even know how much I needed to hear that. That was Emily's twist. She was discovering that surrender was not weakness. It wasn't giving up. It was giving into the moment, into presence, into a kind of love that doesn't need to fix or hold or control. Buddhist wisdom teaches that compassion is not about removing someone's pain, but about being fully present with them in it. That night, Emily sat on her porch, the cool air brushing against her skin, and thought about how many times in her life she had confused love with control, how often she had tried to manage, arrange, rescue, when all anyone really needed was for her to show up and stay. The next morning, as she walked through the park near her house, Emily noticed things she'd never paid attention to before. The way the dew clung to the grass, the quiet chatter of the birds overhead, a dog chasing its own tail in circles, completely lost in the joy of the moment. And as she walked, a memory floated up. The day she had dropped Rachel off at college years ago, standing at the curb holding back tears, pretending to be strong. She had wanted to tell Rachel everything then. How to make friends, how to study, how to protect her heart. But the only words that had come out were, "Call me if you need anything." Now, walking alone, Emily realized that was enough. That had always been enough. Later that week, Emily joined a local meditation group. It was a small circle of people. Some young, some old, gathered in a quiet room above a bookstore. They sat together in silence, eyes closed, hands resting in their laps. At first, Emily's mind raced. She thought about laundry, bills, Rachel, what to cook for dinner. But then she remembered what she had been practicing. The art of noticing without clinging. She let the thoughts rise and fall like waves, coming and going. And in that quiet room, surrounded by strangers, Emily felt a warmth bloom in her chest. She was not alone. Here's the beautiful paradox. The more we practice surrender, the more we begin to feel connected. Not because we're clinging to each other, but because we're standing side by side in the rawness of being human. Buddhist teachings call this interbeing, the understanding that we are all threads in the same vast tapestry, held together not by control, but by presence. A few days later, Emily's neighbor Linda knocked again, this time with a small pot of daisies in her hands. "For you," Linda said, smiling shyly. "Just thank you for the other day." Emily took the flowers, touched by the gesture. She placed them on her windowsill, the one that now stayed open most days. As the breeze drifted in, ruffling the curtains, Emily watched the petals tremble slightly in the wind, and she thought, "This is the practice. This is the practice. This is the life I've been running from. Messy, unpredictable, sometimes painful, but stunning in its small, ordinary gifts." That evening, Emily pulled out her notebook and wrote, Rachel's voice softening over the phone. "The dew on the grass in the morning light, daisies on the windowsill, dancing in the breeze." She closed the notebook, placed it by her bed, and lay down. And as she drifted towards sleep, Emily felt the kind of quiet that no amount of overthinking had ever been able to buy her. The twist, she realized, was not in escaping life's storms. It was in learning how to stay, to breathe, and to love through them. And that, dear listener, is where the real transformation begins. Emily thought the hardest part of her journey would be calming her own restless mind. But as the days passed, she began to see something unexpected. The calm she was building inside wasn't staying locked in her chest. It was spilling outward, gently, quietly, into the lives around her. It started with small moments. At work, when a younger colleague rushed into her office, breathless and panicked over a missed deadline, Emily did something the old version of herself never would have done. She put her pen down, folded her hands, and said calmly, "Take a deep breath. Let's look at it together." The younger woman blinked, surprised, and in that small pause, something softened between them. On a walk through the neighborhood, Emily noticed an elderly man struggling to carry groceries up his front steps. For a moment she hesitated. She was running late after all, but then she heard that quiet whisper inside, the one that had become her new companion. "Slow down. Be here." She walked over, offered a hand, and together they climbed the steps. The man thanked her with a smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes, and Emily felt something loosen inside her chest, a knot she hadn't even known she was carrying. That evening, back at home, Emily brewed a cup of tea and sat by her open window. The daisies from Linda still sat on the windowsill, a little wilted now, but still lovely. As the wind moved through the room, she closed her eyes and took a breath. And in that breath she understood something she had only glimpsed before, that healing is not just a personal project. It's contagious, it's contagious, it's communal. When you soften, you invite others to soften. When you slow down, you give others permission to slow too. The next morning, Emily decided to try something bold. She invited a few neighbors over for tea. Linda, the young couple from next door, and even the quiet widower from across the street. They sat in Emily's living room, mugs in hand, awkward at first, unsure of why they were there. But Emily kept the conversation simple. She asked about their days, their families, their worries. She listened without rushing to fill the silence. And as the minutes passed, the awkwardness melted. Laughter bubbled up. Stories were shared. For the first time in years, Emily's home felt full. Not with noise or chaos, but with the gentle hum of human connection. Buddhist wisdom teaches us that we all suffer in some way, and that the path to freedom isn't about removing suffering, but about walking through it together. Thich Nhat Hanh once said, "Compassion is a verb." Emily was beginning to understand that. It wasn't just about sitting on her cushion, breathing in solitude. It was about showing up, open-hearted, for the people around her. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in streaks of gold and pink, Emily stood by her window again. She thought about Rachel, who was still navigating her divorce, about Linda, who was learning to trust people again after years of keeping to herself, about the young man at the cafe, the elderly neighbor, her colleagues at work. And it hit her. The circle of healing was so much larger than she had ever imagined. She didn't need to have all the answers. She didn't need to fix anyone. She just needed to keep showing up, breathing, listening, offering her quiet presence like an anchor in the storm. That night, Emily wrote in her journal, helped the neighbor with his groceries, hosted tea for the first time in years, sat in the quiet, feeling the world expand. She closed the journal, turned off the light, and lay in bed. And as sleep began to gather her in, Emily felt something she hadn't felt in a long, long time. A sense of belonging. Not the kind that comes from being needed or from proving herself useful, but the kind that comes from simply being part of the human fabric, stitched together by kindness, vulnerability, and the quiet miracle of showing up. The twist was clear now. Emily's healing had never been just about herself. It was a ripple, a wave, a small but powerful force of softness moving through her world. And as she drifted off, she smiled at the thought. Maybe this was the real work of aging, the real task of the second half of life, not to build or accomplish or conquer, but to connect, to soften, to become a gentle presence in a world that so desperately needs it. Emily once believed that peace would come when everything in her life was finally in place, when her career was steady, when her children were settled, when her body stopped aching, when the past no longer pulled at her heart. She thought peace was something just over the next hill, waiting patiently for her to arrive. But at 52, standing at the window of her quiet home, Emily was beginning to understand something that Buddhist wisdom has whispered for centuries. Peace does not wait for the conditions of life to be perfect. Peace waits for you to turn toward life, just as it is. It was a windy autumn afternoon when the truth of this finally sank in. Emily was walking through the park, leaves crunching beneath her feet. Scarf tugged tight against the cold. The air smelled like damp earth and wood smoke. She passed families playing, joggers pounding the trail, couples lost in conversation. And then, at the edge of the lake, she stopped. The water rippled wildly in the wind, sending tiny waves skittering across the surface. A single, weathered bench sat facing the lake, and on it a man about her age sat alone, staring at the water. Without quite knowing why, Emily walked over and sat down at the far end of the bench. For a few minutes, they sat in silence. She could feel the tension in her shoulders, the swirl of her thoughts. Should I say something? Is he okay? Will he think I'm strange? But then the man spoke, voice soft, without turning his head. Funny, isn't it? How the world just keeps moving, no matter what's going on inside you. Emily nodded slowly. Yeah, she said. It really is. They sat a little longer. Then, almost as if he could sense her heart, the man added, My wife passed last year. I come here sometimes just to remember I'm still part of things. Emily felt a tightness rise in her throat. I lost someone too, she murmured, and then, without thinking, she placed her hand on the bench, palm open, a small offering of presents. They didn't need to say much more. In that simple moment, two strangers sitting beside the wild, restless water, Emily saw something she had missed for so many years. Life was never going to stop being uncertain. There would always be waves, always be wind, always be moments when the heart aches and the future feels blurry. But maybe, just maybe, the work was not to quiet the storm, but to find her ground inside it. That evening, back at home, Emily pulled out an old photo album she hadn't touched in years. She flipped through the pages slowly. Her children as toddlers, her wedding day, snapshots of vacations and birthdays and everyday joys. Each image was a doorway into a moment she could never get back. And yet, instead of tightening her chest, the pictures softened something inside her. She saw, maybe for the first time, that every season of her life had been a wave, rising, breaking, dissolving into the next. She closed the album, set it gently on the table, and sat in the quiet. Her breath moved in and out, a rhythm as old as the earth. And in that rhythm, Emily found a strange kind of peace. Not the peace of certainty, but the peace of certainty. But the peace of surrender. In Buddhism, there's a teaching called anicca, impermanence. It tells us that everything we cling to will one day change, fade, or pass away. To the untrained heart, this feels like bad news, but to the heart that has softened, it is the most liberating truth of all. Because when you stop trying to grip life so tightly, your hands are free to touch it with tenderness. Emily began to live from this place. When she called her children, she listened with more patience, knowing they were busy carving out their own lives. When a neighbor complained about something petty, she smiled instead of bristling, sensing the smallness of the grievance in the grand scheme of things. When old fears arose at night, she placed a hand on her chest and whispered, "This too belongs." And then came the real test. Emily was diagnosed with a minor but persistent health condition. Nothing life-threatening, but enough to shake her sense of stability. The old Emily would have spiraled into anxiety, consumed by questions. Why me? What now? Will I be okay? But this time she surprised herself. She sat quietly in the doctor's office, hands folded in her lap. She listened carefully. She asked the questions she needed to ask, and when she left the office, stepping into the cool autumn air, she took a long, steady breath. She realized nothing had fundamentally changed. She was still here, still breathing, still able to touch the moment with care. That night, Emily wrote in her journal, sat by the lake, met a stranger, looked through old photos, felt gratitude instead of grief, faced my own uncertainty with a little more grace. She paused, pen hovering above the page, and then she wrote something she hadn't quite believed until now. I am learning to trust the unknown. The twist was not that Emily had finally figured everything out. It was that she no longer needed to. The craving for answers, the desperate need to tie up every loose end, had softened into something far more beautiful. The ability to rest inside the questions themselves. As Emily turned out the light that night, she whispered one final thought into the dark. Thank you for this messy, mysterious, unfinished life. And in that quiet, without fanfare, she crossed a threshold. Not into a life without challenges, but into a life held with open hands. It was a chilly December morning when Emily first realized how far she had come. She stood in line at the grocery store, waiting with a loaf of bread, some oranges, and a carton of milk in her basket. In front of her, a young mother wrestled with a fussy toddler, fumbling for her wallet as the little boy cried and kicked his feet against the shopping cart. The old Emily, the one from years ago, would have felt impatient. She would have tapped her foot, sighed quietly, and wished the line would just move along. But now Emily felt something else entirely. She saw herself, not literally, but with the kind of gentle recognition that comes from a heart that has been cracked open and slowly stitched itself back together. Without thinking, she leaned forward, smiled warmly at the mother, and said, "Take your time. We've all been there." The woman's eyes filled with tears, caught between exhaustion and relief. "Thank you," she whispered. Just 2 words, but in them was the entire world. Emily left the store that day with more than groceries. She walked out with a quiet, glowing realization. She was no longer just healing herself. She was becoming someone who could hold space for the healing of others. Buddhist wisdom has a beautiful word for this: bodhicitta, the awakened heart. It's the moment when your personal journey of awakening naturally spills over into compassion for those around you. You don't have to be a saint. You don't have to have it all figured out. You simply become a lighthouse, steady in your own small way, offering light to anyone who happens to be drifting nearby. Over the next few months, Emily began to notice the ripple effect. She found herself lingering after yoga class to chat with the woman who always rolled up her mat too quickly, the one who looked like she might break into tears if anyone dared to ask, "How are you really?" She started volunteering once a week at the library, reading stories to children whose parents worked late. She even reached out to her estranged sister, not with an agenda not to fix the relationship, but simply to say, "I'm here when you're ready." And the real twist, The thing that made Emily's transformation so quietly astonishing was this: none of these actions were grand. They were small, almost invisible. But they came from a place of deep, grounded presence. One afternoon, as snow fell softly outside, Emily sat by her window, the same window where, months ago, she had first wrestled with the restless ache of overthinking. She sipped her tea, watched the snow settle on the branches, and thought about a line she had once read from the Buddha. As a mother would protect her only child, so with a boundless heart should one cherish all living beings. She closed her eyes, breathed in, breathed out, and felt into the vastness of those words. She wasn't perfect. She still had days when old worries crept in like shadows across the floor. But now, she met those worries with kindness, as if comforting a small child. And in doing so, she had become someone who could extend that same kindness to the world. One evening, Emily's neighbor, a retired widower named Tom, knocked on her door. He was holding a small battered radio in his hands. "Emily," he said, "this old thing stopped working. I don't know why, but I thought you might, I don't know, want to listen to it with me one last time?" So they sat together on Emily's porch, wrapped in blankets, the broken radio between them. Tom fiddled with the dials, but all they could get was faint static and the occasional crackle of a distant station. And then Emily, with that same quiet magic she was learning to trust, said, "Maybe it's not about the music, Tom. Maybe it's just about sitting here together." He laughed softly, the kind of laugh that breaks open the heart. "Maybe you're right," he said. That night, as Emily lay in bed, she understood something she wished she had known all along. The journey was never about fixing every part of her life. It was about learning how to be present with life as it unfolded, messy, unpredictable, tender, and wild. She thought about how much time she had once wasted chasing peace, as if it were a prize at the end of some race. And now, here it was, sitting quietly beside her on a cold night, wrapped in blankets, listening to static on an old radio with a neighbor who just wanted not to be alone. Buddhist wisdom teaches that the final stage of healing is not when you feel done, but when you begin to serve. Not out of duty, not out of duty, not out of guilt, but because your own awakening overflows naturally into the lives of others. Emily smiled in the dark, a soft, private smile. She was becoming a lighthouse, not to save anyone, not to light up the whole world, but simply to stand in her place, steady and shining, for whoever might need a bit of warmth on their way home. And perhaps, just perhaps, that was what all her overthinking had been leading her toward all along. Emily once believed peace was something loud, something triumphant. She thought it would arrive with a rush, sweeping her up like a great wave, washing away her overthinking, her worries, her restless nights. But what she learned, what life had slowly, tenderly revealed, was that peace does not knock on the door like a grand visitor. It slips in quietly, like sunlight through a window you forgot you left open. It was a Sunday morning, the kind of soft, gray morning that made the world feel hushed and reflective. Emily sat by the window with her tea, the old radio still resting on the shelf. Outside, the neighborhood stirred slowly awake. The sound of a newspaper landing on a porch, the murmur of voices from the sidewalk, the bark of a dog chasing a squirrel through last autumn's leaves. Inside there was a stillness that felt earned, like a well-worn armchair or a favorite sweater pulled from the back of a drawer. Emily closed her eyes and let the quiet fill her, let it settle into her chest like a kind of knowing. She no longer fought the thoughts when they came. She no longer saw them as invaders, but as weather, clouds moving across the sky of her mind. And here's the real twist, the gentle surprise she never saw coming. She had stopped waiting for peace to feel perfect, because it turned out peace was not the absence of pain, or the complete stillness of mind, or the flawless control over every detail of life. Peace was simply this: the ability to be with whatever arose, without needing to run away. As the morning unfolded, Emily moved through her house with quiet intention. She watered the plants, humming softly to herself. She sorted laundry, smiling at the familiar rhythm of folding shirts and matching socks. She paused at the bookshelf, fingers trailing over the spines of well-loved books. Every task became a kind of meditation, a way of touching life without rushing past it. Later that day, she took a walk to the park. There, on a weathered bench, she found Tom, her neighbor, feeding breadcrumbs to a gathering of pigeons. He looked up as she approached, his face lighting up with a grin. "Emily," he called out, "you have perfect timing. These birds were just asking about you." She laughed, the kind of laugh that comes from deep in the belly, unguarded and free. Sitting beside Tom, she watched the birds scatter and return. Scatter and return. She marveled at their simple persistence, the way they trusted life enough to keep coming back, no matter how many times they were startled away. "Funny, isn't it?" Tom mused. "They're scared half the time, but they still show up for crumbs." Emily smiled, the truth of it warming her from the inside. "Yeah," she said softly, "we all do." As the sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the sky with strokes of amber and rose, Emily felt something inside her shift, not dramatically, not like a lightning strike, but like the soft click of a door quietly swinging open. She realized she had arrived. Not at the end of her journey, but at the beginning of a new one. A journey where peace was not a destination, but a companion. Buddhist wisdom teaches that enlightenment is not about escaping the human experience, but about inhabiting it fully with an open and undefended heart. Emily understood now that the greatest gift of mindfulness was not the ability to silence her mind, but the ability to stay present with her life, moment by precious moment. As she walked home that evening, the cool air brushing against her cheeks, Emily whispered a quiet thank you into the twilight. Not to any particular person or force, but to life itself, messy, unpredictable, tender life. Back home, she stood once again at her window. She opened it wide, letting in the night air. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, a car door shut, a child's laughter floated on the breeze. Emily closed her eyes, placed a hand over her heart, and simply breathed. For the first time in years, she didn't feel the need to fix anything. She didn't need to outrun her thoughts or perfect her life or earn her rest. She was here. She was enough. She was home. And maybe that is what the whole journey had been about. Not about changing who she was, but about remembering who she had always been beneath the noise. Emily turned off the lights, climbed into bed, and as her head touched the pillow, she smiled. Outside, the night stretched wide and calm. Inside, Emily drifted towards sleep, not because her mind was finally silent, but because she had learned to rest within its song. As we close this journey together, I want you to pause. Feel your breath. Feel the weight of your own hands resting on your lap. Notice the quiet around you and the even quieter space inside. You've just traveled through stories of doubt, of overthinking, of loneliness, and you've discovered that peace was never somewhere far away. It was right here, all along, in the space between your thoughts, in the small, ordinary moments you once rushed past. So tonight, when the old habits come calling, when the mind spins its endless what-ifs, when the heart aches with old questions, place a hand over your heart and remind yourself, I am here, I am enough, I can rest. And if this journey touched you, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who might be lying awake right now, searching for the same kind of peace. Leave a comment with your story. You never know whose heart it might reach. And if you'd like to walk more of this path together, subscribe to join a circle of people just like you, seekers, healers, ordinary souls learning to befriend their minds, one breath at a time. Remember, you are not behind. You are not broken. You are not too late. You are home.